You're standing at the edge of a square hole in the desert floor, in Rajasthan, at noon in May. The sun is straight overhead, and the temperature reads 45 degrees 113 on the other scale. The stone under your sandals is too hot to stand on for long. The air over the open ground ripples and bends, the way it does above a fire. There is no cloud, there is no wind worth the name. There is no shade anywhere you turn, except one place, straight down, because the hole in front of you is not a hole, it is a staircase. 13 stories of steps, cut into the earth in tight crisscrossing flights, falling away beneath your feet toward a small dark square of water at the very bottom. From the rim it looks like a puzzle, or a trap. It is neither. It is a machine for staying alive. A woman steps past you, carrying an empty clay pot on her hip. She does not hesitate at the edge. She starts down. You follow. By the third level, the light has changed. The walls rise around you, and the sun no longer reaches your shoulders, only the crown of your head. By the sixth, even that is gone. The roar of the heat at 45 degrees has a kind of roar begins to fall away behind you. The stone beside your hand is no longer warm, it is cool. You press your palm flat against it and feel the cold of deep earth. Stone the sun has not touched in 1,000 years. Lower still, the air thickens and chills. It smells of water and old rock. The woman ahead of you reaches the bottom, kneels at the dark pool, and fills her pot. Down here, the air is only a handful of degrees cooler than the surface. 5, perhaps 6. But out of the reach of the sun, out of the moving heat, it feels like another country. The desert is still up there, still burning. You can see it as a hard white square of sky, far above your head. You are simply no longer in it. No engine made this cool. No power line runs to this place. No machine hums in the dark. There is only stone, depth, and water, and a people who looked at a desert that killed, and decided to build downward into the one thing the sun could not reach. This is a stepwell. The people of Rajasthan cut thousands of them, and the question is not whether they worked. The principle is older than any of these wells, and it is buried under your feet right now. Dig down into the earth, anywhere, and the temperature stops following the sun. At the surface, the ground swings wildly, scorching by afternoon, cold by dawn. But a few meters down, that swing flattens out. A few meters more, and it disappears almost entirely. The deep earth holds a steady temperature close to the local yearly average, and it barely moves between noon and midnight, or even between summer and winter. Engineers call this ground coupling. The stepwell builders had no word for it. They simply knew that the deeper you went, the cooler and the steadier the world became, and they built to reach it. Stone does the same work in a second way. Thick rock absorbs heat slowly and releases its slowly high thermal mass, with a long thermal lag. By the time the afternoon's heat has worked its way into a deep stone wall, the sun has set, and the night air is pulling it back out again. The heat never arrives where it would do harm. It is always running late. Now, set those two quiet facts against what was happening overhead. The Thar Desert in high summer is one of the hardest inhabited places on the planet. Daytime highs sit between 45 and 50 degrees through May and June, day after day, with the pre-monsoon weeks the cruelest of all. In May of 2016, the town of Phalodi, in the heart of Rajasthan, recorded 51 degrees 124 on the other scale, the highest temperature ever measured in India. That is not a number you survive in the open. It is a number that kills the unprepared in hours. And the heat was only half of the problem. The other half was the swing. A desert does not stay hot, it stays extreme. The same ground that hit 45 by afternoon could fall by 15 or 20 degrees after dark, because the dry, cloudless sky that let the sun pour in by day let the warmth radiate straight back out at night. Nothing held it. There was no humidity to trap it, no cloud to reflect it. The surface world lurched from furnace to chill and back again every single day. There was no power to fix this. No fan, no pump, no refrigeration, not for most of human history in this place, and certainly not in the 8th or 9th century, when the oldest of the great stepwells were already being cut. Whatever cooling the people of the Thar were going to get, they would have to take it from the physics of earth, stone, and water, using nothing but the shape of what they built. So they stopped fighting the surface. They went under it. Think about what it takes to build a palace downward. A tower rises into the cheapest material there is: open air. A stepwell does the opposite. Every level of it has to be carved out of solid ground and lined with cut stone, the spoil hauled up and out by hand, the walls dressed and fitted as the floor of the world drops away beneath the masons. It is harder than building up, slower than building up, and far more dangerous. The people of Rajasthan did it thousands of times. They did it because the ground was the one ally the sun could not corrupt. Go back to that staircase you descended. Its shape is not decoration, though it became some of the most beautiful architecture in India. The shape is the engineering. By sinking the structure deep and narrow, the builders did three things at once. They reached the cool, stable earth that ground coupling gave them for free. They surrounded the lower levels with thick stone mass, so the walls themselves stayed cool and pulled warmth out of the air. And they made the opening at the top small, relative to the depth below, so that the brutal overhead sun could only ever strike a shrinking patch of the steps. Below a certain level, direct sunlight simply never lands. The shaft is in permanent shade by its own geometry. Then there are the steps themselves. And here, the desert builders did something that still stops visitors cold. At Chand Baori, in the village of Abhaneri, the staircase is not a single flight. It is a vast lattice of double flights, steps running down, across, and back, fitted into three walls of a deep square, in a crisscrossing pattern that repeats story after story. Around 3,500 steps drop roughly 13 stories, near 20 meters, to the water at the bottom. It was begun in the 8th or 9th century under a ruler the tradition names Chanda of the Nikumba line. Stand at the rim and it reads as pure geometry, a riddle in stone. Walk it, and the logic appears. Those flights are how you keep reaching the water no matter how far it falls, and they multiply the cool, shaded stone surface that a single straight stair never could. That crisscross instinct shows up again and again across the region. At Panna Meena Kund, near Amber, the flights run in mirror image zigzags down all sides, so symmetrical that the local saying holds you can never come back up the same stair you went down. The pattern looks playful. It is also practical. Maximum stone, maximum descent, minimum opening to the sky. So the structure handed the people two gifts before a tip of water entered the story. It put them deep, in reach of the steady cool of the earth, and it wrapped them in shaded stone that the sun could not get at. But shade and mass only chill the surfaces. They do not, by themselves, explain the thing you felt most sharply on the way down, that the air itself, the air you were breathing at the bottom, had gone cold. For that, you have to look at how a stepwell handles the one substance that obeys gravity even when it is invisible. You have to look at the air. Air has weight. Cool air weighs more than warm air, and like anything heavy, it sinks and pools in the lowest place it can find. A stepwell is, before it is anything else, the lowest place for a long way in every direction, a deep stone pocket sunk into the desert floor. And so it does to air, what a bowl does to water. It collects it. Here is what happens over the course of a desert day. Overnight, under that clear, radiating sky, the air near the ground cools hard. That cold, dense air slides down the steps and settles in the bottom of the shaft, filling it from the floor up like water filling a cup. When the sun comes up and the surface begins to roast, the cold air at the bottom does not rush out to meet it. It has nowhere to go. It is heavier than everything above it, so it stays put, trapped beneath the lighter, hotter air riding over the mouth of the well. The depths become a reservoir of yesterday's cool, held in place by simple weight. Builders elsewhere in the hot world used the same trick deliberately and gave it a name: the cold trap. The Rajasthani stepwell is a cold trap 13 stories deep. The shaded stone you walked past does its part here too. All that cool mass is in constant, quiet contact with the trapped air, bleeding warmth out of it, holding it down near the temperature of the deep earth rather than the temperature of the sky. The air does not just sit cool, it is actively kept cool every hour by thousands of tons of rock that the sun can no longer reach. And then there is the water at the bottom, which does the final, decisive thing. When water evaporates, it carries heat away with it. That is evaporative cooling. The same physics that makes sweat work, the same reason a wet cloth on the neck feels cold. Down at the floor of the well, a broad surface of water sits exposed to the trapped air, slowly evaporating into it. Every gram of vapor that lifts off the pool pulls a little heat out of the surrounding air. In the still, shaded, enclosed bottom of a stepwell, that cooling does not blow away. It accumulates, right where the people gathered. Stack the three effects, and the bottom of a deep stepwell can sit something like 5 or 6 degrees below the surface air, and far below what raw sunlight would make of an exposed courtyard. The number sounds modest, written down. Lived at 45 degrees. It is the difference between a space you flee and a space you rest in. And that is before you account for the shade and the stillness, which the thermometer never captures, but the body always does. That is why the woman with the pot walked down into the dark at the hottest hour of the hottest month, and why she was in no hurry once she reached the floor. The well had spent the whole night manufacturing a pocket of cool, and it would hold it through the worst of the day. That cooled the air. It still didn't solve the water. Because cool air, in the end, is a comfort. Water is the reason anyone lived in the Thar at all. And water in a desert does not sit politely at the surface, waiting to be scooped. It hides, it sinks, and it moves, and a stepwell was built, first and last, to chase it down. Start with the rhythm of a desert year, because everything about a stepwell answers to it. For most of the year, almost no rain falls on Rajasthan. Then, for a few weeks of monsoon, the sky opens, and a year's worth of water arrives nearly at once. The land cannot hold a steady supply at the surface. It gets a flood, and then a long drought. The genius of the stepwell is that it works with that boom and bust instead of against it. During the monsoon, runoff pours in and the well fills, the water climbing the steps level by level. Then, through the long, dry months, the level drops and keeps dropping, week after week, as the water table beneath the desert sinks lower and lower. A simple well solves this badly. A round shaft with a bucket gives you one fixed point to draw from, and when the water falls below easy reach, you are lowering ropes into the dark and hauling against the depth. The stepwell solves it with the staircase itself. The steps are not just a way down into the cool. They are a way to walk to the water wherever it happens to be that month. Full in August, you draw near the top. Bone dry April, you descend flight after flight to a shrunken pool far below, but you always walk down to it on dry stone, on your own feet, with a pot on your hip. The architecture tracks a falling water table the way a staircase tracks a slope. That is why they are so deep. They were dug not for the water of one season, but for the lowest the water would ever fall. This made the stepwell the beating heart of any settlement that had one. It was reservoir, well, and water harvesting basin in a single structure, catching the monsoon, storing it underground where the sun could not steal it back through evaporation, and metering it out across the dry year. Shade alone was never enough. Look closer, and almost every great stepwell is really a waterworks first and an architecture second. The grandest of them were built as civic gifts, often by rulers, and frequently by women. At Bundi, the Queen Rani Nathavati Ji commissioned Raniji Chand Baori in 1699, a stepwell more than 40 meters deep, its entrance crowned with a high ornamental arch and carved pillars, one of dozens of Baoris that earned Bundi its name as a city of stepwells. To give a town a stepwell was to give it survival itself, a year-round, sun-proof supply of the one thing the desert refused to hand over freely. It was the most valuable piece of infrastructure a desert ruler could leave behind, and like all great infrastructure, it was not free. Someone had to cut it out of the ground. Picture the work. There were no machines, only hand tools, baskets, ropes, draft animals, and people. The builders began at the surface and went down, cutting through soil and then into rock, dressing the stone into steps and facing the walls as the floor of the excavation sank beneath them. Every basket of spoil was hauled up by hand or by animal. Every block was shaped and set by a mason standing in a pit that grew deeper around him by the week. A great stepwell was not the work of a season. It was the work of years, sometimes a generation, and the deeper it went, the more dangerous it became. Walls that could collapse inward, the long fall to the stone below, the slow grind of cutting downward into the dark. The cool you felt at the bottom was paid for in that labor, years before you ever set foot on the rim. What they built was not only a water source, it was a building used differently at every hour and every season, thermal zoning written into stone. At the killing peak of a summer afternoon, the lower galleries were a refuge, the one cool place for miles, and people came down simply to be out of the heat. In the gentler light of early morning and dusk, the well became a gathering place, its broad steps and shaded landings turning into a kind of public room. The same flights that delivered you to the water also gave you tiers to sit on, ledges to rest in, niches and pavilions cut into the walls. A stepwell asked to be lived in, not just drawn from. That use fell heavily and meaningfully to women. In village life, it was most often women who walked to fetch the household's water, and so the stepwell became their ground in a way little else in the public world was. They came in the cool hours, descended together, drew water, and stayed to talk, to rest, to be out of the sun and, for a while, out of the day's demands. The architecture made room for it. Some of the most celebrated stepwells were commissioned by queens precisely as gifts to this world of women and water. The instinct spread well beyond Rajasthan. At Jodhpur, Toorji Ka Jhalra was built in the 1740s under the patronage of the city's queen, a deep stepwell of carved sandstone that has lately been cleaned out and brought back to life in the heart of the old city. Across western India, the same idea appears under different names: Baori, Baoli, Vav, Jhalra. Wherever a dry country people needed to reach water that hid underground and wanted shaded, cool stone around them while they did it. Different dynasties, different centuries, the same answer to the same desert. And underneath the engineering, in the minds of the people who built and used these places, water was never only a resource. It was something close to sacred. To understand the stepwell fully, you have to follow it the last step down from physics into meaning. In a land where water meant the difference between a living village and an empty one, the place that held the water was never going to be merely useful. It became holy. Many stepwells were sacred sites as much as practical ones, their walls carved with gods and guardians, their descent treated as a kind of pilgrimage. To walk down into a stepwell was to move out of the ordinary glaring world and into a cool, dim, ordered space gathered around water. And that journey carried its own weight of meaning. The structure was an inverted temple, where a shrine on a hilltop climbs toward the divine, a stepwell descends to it, into the dark cradle of the earth where the water lives. The grandest of them make the ambition plain. At Patan, in neighboring Gujarat, the queen Udayamati had Rani ki Vav cut in the 11th century as a memorial to her late king. 7 levels of stairs and galleries lined with more than 1,000 sculptures, an entire subterranean palace built around a well. For centuries it lay choked with silt and forgotten. When it was finally excavated and restored, the world recognized what it was: a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the image India chose to print on its 100-rupee note. A waterworks, elevated into one of the masterpieces of its civilization. Step back far enough and you see the same problem being solved, again and again, by people who never met. The Persians sank qanats, gently sloping tunnels that walked water for miles underground, out of the sun's reach. Builders across the hot world dug cisterns and sardabs and cellars to trap the cool and hoard the water. The people of Rajasthan answered with the stepwell. The forms are different. The physics is identical. Get below the surface, into the steady cool of the earth. Put thick mass between yourself and the sun. Store water where the heat cannot evaporate it away. Cultures separated by deserts and centuries arrived at the same handful of moves, because the desert only ever asked one question, and there were only ever so many true answers. So come back, one last time, to the rim. The sun is still straight overhead. The stone is still too hot to stand on. 45 degrees, 113, the air bending over the open ground. Everything that tried to live up here, in the glare, had to fight for it. But the woman with the pot did not fight. She walked down 13 stories, 3,500 steps, into stone the sun had never touched, into air kept cool overnight and held there by its own weight, down to water stored against the worst the year could bring. 800 years after someone first cut these steps into the ground, the cool is still waiting at the bottom for anyone willing to descend. They didn't beat the heat with power. They had none. They beat it with the shape of the ground itself. They didn't fight the heat. They engineered